Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Modern Moron. Flying solo this week, so I'm going to cram a bunch of stuff in and no politics. Because I just can't. It's just too much. I hope they all impeach each other and we all have to come up with someone new. That's it for politics. Okay, item number 1, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. They are finally picking up some trash in the Pacific Garbage Patch. This is good news. They, being a nonprofit called the OceanCleanup.com, founded by Dutch inventor and entrepreneur Boyan Slat. I guarantee I pronounced that incorrectly. This kid is only 25 years old, and he and they are doing it.
During the summer, we have adjusted the system by having a parachute anchor that slows down the system so that there is a consistent difference in speed between the plastic and the system, so that the plastic can actually float into the system, purely driven by the natural forces of the ocean. The goal is to clean up half the Great Pacific Garbage Patch in 5 years, once we're ready to scale. And this would constitute to roughly 15,000 metric tons of plastic per year.
They announced last week that their system is successfully capturing and collecting plastic debris. After 1 year of testing, they have succeeded in developing a self-contained system in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch that is using the natural forces of the ocean, namely the currents and the prevailing winds, to passively catch and concentrate plastic. They will now begin work on making the system larger and more durable to the point that it can retain plastic for up to a year or possibly longer before collection is necessary. How cool is that? Slat said, I think in a few years' time when we have the full-scale fleet out there, I think it should be possible to cover the operational cost of the cleanup operation using the plastic harvested. Very cool. Again, links at the bottom.
On to number 2.
The My Favorite Moron Award. I'd like to take a break from Rudy Giuliani.
Go look at my tweets.
This week's award goes to London climate change protesters called Extinction Rebellion. These morons for Mother Nature had a fire truck with fake blood and were going to spray the side of the Government Treasury building in London. In one story, the red stuff was referred to as paint. Another called it red food dye, and another called it organic liquid beetroot. Was it paint? Was it food coloring? Does it matter? Either way, isn't that pollution or at least wasteful? Nice work, Extinction Idiots.
Yeah, baby!
In the video of their handiwork, the nozzle on the fire hose comes off within seconds, and the remainder of the 1,800 liters pouring out like a water wiggle onto the street. That's about 475 gallons. And yes, I just said water wiggle. The fabulous summer toy from the 70s, brought to us by Whammo, which would never be sold today because it would be viewed as like a lethal weapon. Thanks, Whammo!
Item number 3.
Sleep apnea. I have been diagnosed with mild to moderate sleep apnea, which is like a version of snoring, but you stop breathing, which is generally not a good thing. So I've been given some options, and I'm currently trying out a really sexy contraption called a CPAP device. I put it on, covering my nose, and I look kind of like a jet fighter pilot about to fly a tiny model airplane. Just to get the thing, I had to attend a class with a bunch of other apnea idiots, and there's always that one person who has to ask a goddamn question every 30 seconds because they're such a snowflake with special circumstances. At one point, get this, she asked, mind you, this class is taking place in a hospital. She says,
Do you clean out the masks before you hand them out again?
seriously?
Male chauvinist pig.
It's a goddamn hospital. They're concerned about two things. Having a sterile environment so they can treat your health issues, and 2, to avoid lawsuits. Probably in reverse order in priority.
We're looking at a very serious lawsuit.
I bring up the sleep apnea thing because while you may not have it, many people do have smart watches that have sleep trackers these days. I have one, I've had it for a while, and I'm always curious to see how well I'm supposed to have slept, as opposed to just trusting the way I feel, because that would be crazy. It turns out sleep tracking apps, for the most part, are crap. They're inaccurate. From Johns Hopkins University and Hospital, they don't measure sleep directly. Instead, they often measure inactivity as a surrogate for estimating sleep. Most sleep tracking devices make some guesstimate as to how much you're actually sleeping. A New York Times article on sleep apps cited a study conducted by Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine, which cited that in their study, the researchers warned that sleep tracking tech could provide inaccurate data and worsen insomnia by making people obsessed with achieving perfect slumber, a condition they called orthosomnia. It was one of the latest pieces of research supporting the idea that health apps don't necessarily make people healthier. Dr. Grandner of the University of Arizona, also a consultant to Fitbit, think about that, said that consumer-grade sleep tracking was in its early stages and that it was too soon to tell what people should do with the data. He said, for a person to be worrying about their sleep stages is like being worried about the gas makeup of the air you're breathing in, which means don't worry about it. But to put the importance of sleep into context, think about this. There are three things you do to generally maintain your health: your diet, your level of exercise, and the amount of rest and sleep you get. So think of this. If you don't eat well on a given day, can you function relatively normal the next day? You probably can. Same thing with exercise. If you don't exercise on a given day, you can probably function relatively well the next day. But if you don't sleep well on a given night, can you function relatively normal the next day? Probably not. So yeah, important to get a good night's sleep, and I hope you are.
Hello. Item number 4.
I thought I could go an episode without a Rudy Giuliani story, but I just can't.
It's like the nose on your face.
Someone in New York, let's say a genius, posted an ad on a subway with the main caption, "Need a lawyer? Call Crazy Rudy." The subway ad includes Rudy's selling points, such as back-channel deals, cable news appearances, has no shame, and will work for free. At the bottom of the ad is a website. It said, go to crazyrudylaw.com for details. So I'm thinking you should do that. Check this out.
Take a little Valley.
But then I thought, you're not going to do that. You've got a life.
Calm down.
But I don't. So I went to the site, and here's what you'll find. On those bullet points, back-channel deals. Need a deal with foreign governments but prefer not to go through government channels? I'm your man. Cable news appearances. I will appear on all cable news networks on behalf of my clients. I promise that each appearance will be 3 things: unhinged, combative, and fun. And finally, works for free. In an effort to shield money from my wife during our divorce, I'm willing to work for free. I only ask that you pick up the bar tab at the end of our session. Email crazyrudylaw@gmail.com to set up a free happy hour consultation.
Goodbye.
Well, whoever did this is with TGL, and it should come as no surprise that this moron has no clue what that means. But they also had an ad on what looks like a bus in New York that said, quote, "Dear United Nations visitors, we are sorry for the actions of our big, dumb president. Love, New York City." How about that? Nice work, friend of the Modern Moron.
Item number 5.
The feminine side of me, a.k.a. my gay alter ego, simply must talk about the new Judy Garland film, Judy. It's emotional just thinking about it, and I'm straight, at least right this second, but you never know. Looking at the trailer, it took me more than a second to realize it was Renee Zellweger playing Judy Garland. And the way she physically captures Judy Garland's frailness in some of her postures and strength in her singing performances is pretty cool. Not knowing all that much about the tragic details of her life, I think I'll be able to suspend my disbelief. But if you know Judy from the top of her brunette head to the tips of her ruby slippers, you might be a little more critical. But this film takes place at the end of her life, in the gigs she had in London and the last husband that she married. And this is from her Wikipedia page, after her death. After Garland's body had been embalmed, Mickey Deans, her 5th husband of only a few months, traveled with her remains to New York City on June 26, 1969, where an estimated 20,000 people lined up to pay their respects at the Frank E. Campbell Funeral Chapel in Manhattan, which remained open all night long to accommodate the overflowing crowd. On June 27th, James Mason, who starred opposite Judy in the second iteration of A Star is Born, gave a eulogy at the funeral. An Episcopal service led by the Reverend Peter A. Delaney of St. Marylebone Parish Church, hope I got that right, London, who had officiated at her marriage to Deans 3 months earlier. Judy's great gift, Mason said in his eulogy, was that she could wring tears out of hearts of rock. She gave so richly and so generously that there was no currency in which to repay her. The public and press were barred. She was interred in a crypt in the community mausoleum at Ferncliff Cemetery in Hartsdale, New York, a small town 24 miles north of Midtown Manhattan. Upon Garland's death, despite having earned millions during her career, her estate came to $40,000, equivalent of $270,000 in 2018. Years of mismanagement of her financial affairs by her representatives and staff, along with her generosity toward her family, resulted in her poor financial situation at the end of her life. About her voice, she possessed the vocal range of a contralto. I did not know that. The contralto has the lowest vocal range of the female voice types. It's between a tenor and mezzo-soprano. Her singing voice has been described as brassy, powerful, effortless, and although the octave range of her voice was comparatively limited, she was capable of alternating between female and male-sounding timbres at will with little effort. What a great voice.
Item number 6.
Wow, I really wrapped that up fast, didn't I? Finally, last weekend, the world of rock and roll lost one of its greatest drummers of all time. And unless you're into music and music history, you might not recognize his name. It was Ginger Baker. He passed away at the age of 80. He was originally a jazz drummer who was also interested in African beats and rhythms. When he put the two together, he became one of the most sought-after recording session drummers in England. There were two other musicians of the same proficiency at their respective instruments, and their names were Jack Bruce, who played bass, and Eric Clapton on guitar. I get it if you don't recognize Jack Bruce as well, but if you don't know Eric Clapton, then you're not allowed to listen any further or any more to this podcast. These three were considered the cream of the crop in the London music scene in the 60s, and when they formed a band, they called themselves Cream. They put out only 4 albums, and it was their second album, Disraeli Gears, that put them at the peak of mixing blues with rock and psychedelia. A writer for the BBC said the album was, quote, a perfect encapsulation of the point where the blues got psychedelic and in turn got heavy, end quote. Eric Clapton found the wah-wah pedal and incorporated it into a number of tracks. Remember a second ago I said Jack Bruce was their bass player and you might not recognize him? Well, he came up with this bass line, which, unless you've been living in a vacuum of silence regarding music, you will recognize. See? See, you do know these guys. That's Cream with Sunshine of Your Love. Ginger Baker was an eccentric, crazy drummer, much like Keith Moon of The Who in terms of craziness, but was a completely different drummer. If you enjoy rockumentaries, there are 2 good ones on Amazon Prime. One is solely on the band Cream and has interviews with all 3, and the second focuses on Ginger Baker himself and what a nut he was, in addition to being profoundly great as a musician and a drummer. It's called Beware of Mr. Baker. By the way, Ginger and Jack Bruce had a volatile relationship, and Ginger was in another group with Eric Clapton, but a different bass player named Rick Gretsch, and a keyboardist that you must have heard of named Steve Winwood. The band was called Blind Faith, and they put out only one self-titled album. I'm putting in a link at the bottom of a Rolling Stone article called Ginger Baker, 10 Tracks That Show His Drumming Genius, as well as a trailer to the documentary that shows how crazy this guy was. Insanely talented and insanely insane, like Johnny Rotten of the Sex Pistols crazy, who was actually in the trailer.
This film is about Ginger Baker, a man who stands for something in life that probably most of you do not. Love and appreciate, no matter how awkward this character may appear to you. God bless him. May the road rise. He helped me rise my road. Love you, Ginger. Johnny Rotten. I'm your man.
That about wraps it up, except for one housekeeping item. We, the royal we meaning I, may be going to 2 episodes a month every other week. Mainly, I don't know why. Maybe it's because of a pathetic but true article I read on The Onion the other day. And if you don't know about The Onion and its fantastic satire, you need to go to theonion.com. They have a story titled, Report, 250 million Americans still need guests on their podcasts this week. Very funny, Onion. You know what? I'm just going to go ahead and read it to you because it's so pathetically true. Plus, it's short. Okay, here we go. Dateline Washington. According to a report out today, 250 million Americans are still scrambling to find someone to appear on their podcasts this week, as the guests they would normally book either just appeared on last week's episode or are too busy hosting their own shows. I've been trying to book my brother-in-law, who occasionally watches Mad Men and could probably fill some time talking about that, but he just called and said he has to guest host his buddy's podcast, said Robert Healy, host of the TV Robcast, and one of the 250 million podcasters nationwide who cannot secure a guest with whom to engage in 45 minutes of inane banter about politics, food, stand-up comedy, or rock music.
You're funny.
I could run a best of Robcast special, but I did that last week and I want to keep it fresh. The report also stated that no podcasters will consider simply not releasing an episode this week, as not one of them wants to risk losing any of the 14 listeners they have been steadily cultivating for the past year and a half. Fuck you, Onion. Thank you, Onion, you jackass truth-sayers. That's it for this moron. Thank you for listening. Source links are at the bottom of the description. And go to themodernmoron.com and like and tweet and Twitter and all that. I hope you check out some of the links. Thanks again. We'll see you next week or in 2 weeks or I don't know. Have a good day.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.